Alrighty. This is about a week after the hurricane. And I cleaned my table off because I really needed my table. So I had to take everything off my table. And I wonder how come I got stuck on there. But and I'm having to go through now, try to straighten everything out and get everything back on track. So, let's see, I think I better go this way with them. My needles. I don't know, I don't remember where I'm at or anything. But, we'll get it all started back again. So, I am so glad that we can get back almost normal. I don't think we'll ever be normal from what happened. But, let's see. This is thread. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do here. There's the blanket. Okay, now these I don't need right now. Let's see. I better hang on to those so I can get to them. I don't need this right now. And these I'm going to be using a little bit when we get this one layer done. So, there we go. Now then, I think maybe, baby, we might be able to get started on this again and see how far that we can go with it. I need 11 of these, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I need 4 more of these. And then we'll be working on the very bottom of the quilt. So, let's see what we can do about playing with these.
But I do not intend to be in my 60s and have never cast out a demon or seen somebody healed. I said, I can't live my whole life with such a huge gap between what we say we believe and where we live. So anyway, he said, well, son, I'll be praying for you. You know, you're probably disillusioned. But that was a watershed moment in my life. And this, of course, there are many other things that played into what happened many years later. But I decided that I didn't want to be a Christian leader. And we put our house up for lease. And I resigned from the Bible college. And I was principal of a Christian school. And we resigned from all that.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Before you go into that, I have a couple questions here for you.
Yeah.
One, so what you were just saying, was that a direct result of this kind of revelation you started having? That you didn't want to be a Christian leader because maybe you had an internal conflict? Was that the connecting?
Okay. Exactly. I knew that what this young man was saying in the class, I knew those were sincere, honest questions that needed to be asked, and I didn't have a good answer for him. And I did, at the time, Tony, I didn't even know anybody besides my wife's grandfather, who was already in heaven. He was A. Allen. He was a healing evangelist. I didn't even know anybody that purported to heal the sick and cast out demons. I just knew that we were supposed to do it. But, the people that came into my father's church, they were good people, but they weren't known for that, except for one fellow who will play into the story a little later, and his name was Jack Sisler, and he was a missionary from Borneo, which is now called New Guinea. But in any event, I just thought I want to, whatever I'm doing, I don't want to be seen as an authority in something that I really have no practical skills in. And so I was not personally content to talk about miracles and the reality of them and our need to be involved in them and not be that guy myself. So I decided to move to Australia. It was far away from everything I was involved in. And I don't want to be critical. I'm not critical in my heart, but I now call this this network of quarter-inch deep religion, I call it the Great American Religious Enterprise. Yeah, I didn't know that term at the time, but I just thought there's a plastic quality about everything that's happening here that real thinking people view as hypocritical. And I just didn't want to be that guy. So my wife and I, we had 3 little boys at the time. We decided to move to Australia, and I made arrangements to lease our house, and I had a job waiting for me there and a vehicle. But anyway, I had been involved in an apostolic network. I was 27 years old at the time, but I was involved in this apostolic network. And I found that most of them were very reluctant to have good, honest, deep conversations and to sort things out. And I just wasn't that guy. So anyway, in that network, a number of times they would ask me to go deal with the thorny issue because nobody else wanted to. So I was more involved than I should be as a young man in seeing the dysfunction of the Great American Religious Enterprise. And frankly, it was disillusioning to me. I never once questioned the reality of a good and almighty creator. It was just the religious operation that I thought this is empty and there's something missing. So anyway, we were all set up to move to Australia, and this group that had sometimes asked me to troubleshoot churches and incorporated me into this apostolic network. They asked if I would come to Yuba City and troubleshoot a church. And at the time, I just really didn't have the heart for it. I thought, I know what this is going to be like, and it's just, a religious dog and pony show, and we're not going to do anything about it anyway. So I just don't want to do that. So I told him, no, I'm done doing that. Anyway, he begged me. He said, one more time. And so I said, okay, I'll do this. If it's understood, this is the last time I'll troubleshoot a church. So I came down here to where we've been for the last 37 and a half years, Yuba City, California. And there was a small church. It had been up to around 250, maybe 300 in its heyday, but it's now down to about 70. And people were disillusioned and cranky, and things weren't going well. And I interviewed anybody in the church that wanted to talk, as was my policy in troubleshooting churches. And so it was just basic, who are you? How long you've been here? What things have you liked the most? What things you think need changed? And so anyway, I interviewed the whole church. There were all kinds of things that they wished were changed. But a name that kept coming up repeatedly was Lou Benninger. I'd say, what are the things you like most about the church? And they'd say something like, well, it was great when Lou Benninger was here, but he's gone now, and that's a bummer. So, I was just doing my due diligence. And so I wrote his name down, circle it, put a star by it, underline it. And so my last interview was with an attorney that was also an elder in this small church. And so I went through the whole thing with him as usual. And when he was all done, I said, I got a question for you. I said, who's Lou Benninger? He said, oh, he was like the father of the church. And I said, really? He said, oh, yeah, he was a drug dealer that was living in a nudist colony up in the foothills and had an experience with Christ. And he said, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. Everybody put your clothes on, no having sex with anybody else, and bring your drugs to the middle of the circle. We're going to get rid of them. And he said, that's where this church started. It was called Morning Star Ranch, and it was through the conversion of Lou Benninger. I thought, wow, that's a fascinating history, from a nudist colony to a Christian church. So I thought, wow, that's something. So I said, well, it seemed like everybody here had really high respect for him. And he said, oh, yeah, Lou's a great guy. Everybody loves him. And I said, well, why don't you invite him back? He said, oh, Lou's not coming back. I said, well, how do you know that? Why don't you just come back and talk about the things you need to talk about and get the wheels back on the wagon? He said, oh, no. He said, you don't understand Lou Benninger. He is not coming back. He said, besides that, he stole $3 million. I said, what? He said, yeah, he took $3 million when he left. And I said, well, you're an attorney. Is the guy in prison? He said, nobody wants to see Lou go to jail. And I remember saying, of all the ridiculous things I've heard these last 3 days, that's the top drawer right there. If, however nice he is, it's not okay to steal $3 million from a floundering church. So this guy says, well, Lou thinks it was his money. And I said, what does that even mean? It either was his money or it was not his money. He said, well, he gave it to the church, but then when the church didn't do well, he felt like he had the right to repossess it, and he took the money out of the bank and left. And I said, well, do you have his phone number? He said, yeah, but he won't talk to you. And I said, well, just in case, give me his phone number. I'd already decided, I might not get anything else done here, but I'm going to find justice to this terrible offense against the little church. And so I wrote down his phone number. I wrote down the county sheriff, and I went to the restaurant. I was done with my interview, so I was flying out the next morning, and I called him, and I said, I'd like to talk to you about what happened at church that day. He said, oh, I'm not interested. And I said, well, dude, get interested, because if you don't talk to me in the next hour, you're going to be talking to the sheriff. And he just went quiet. He said, somebody told you about the money, huh? I said, yes, somebody told me about the money. And it's not okay to steal money from a church. And he said, this is none of your business, and you don't even know what happened. I said, well, two things. I just made it my business. And if you think I need to know more about it, you have an hour to get down here to the restaurant. I'm at Lyons Restaurant. I just ordered a meal. If you're not here by the time I'm finished with my meal, I'm calling the sheriff and telling him that you stole $3 million from the Church of God Tidings. He wasn't happy with that, but he come down there and come storming down there and look around. He saw me. He says, you the guy that's troubleshooting the church? I said, yep. He sat down and he said, where do you get off coming in here? He said, you don't know anything about this church, and you're threatening to turn me into the sheriff? And I said, well, it wouldn't be much of a threat if you hadn't done anything wrong, would it, Mr. Benninger? And he said, I didn't do anything wrong. He said, did they tell you that I put all $3 million in the bank for him? And I said, yeah, they, not in those words, but they told me that you thought it was your money. He said, I never said it was my money. It was money I put into the account. It's God's money, and I'm not going to let them waste it. And Tony, when he said that, I almost reached across the table and hugged the dude. I just thought, finally, some integrity. And I said, okay, so that's the problem? He said, yeah, that's the problem. He said, I busted my hump. He said, this whole thing started in my commune. And I told people, the gospel changed my life. We're going to take it to the ends of the earth. And we all worked hard. He said, you know what it's like to work 50 hours a week and get $2 allowance? I said, no, I've never done that. He said, the whole Morningstar Ranch did that. We started 6 businesses and we put $3 million in the bank. And I'm not going to let them waste that. And I thought, finally, this is refreshing, a real conversation with a guy that has some serious values. And so I said, well, I can respect that. But the problem is in California, you can't repossess your offerings. And he said, well, I did. I said, well, I mean, you can't legally repossess your offerings because you'll go to prison for that. And he leaned forward and he said, did it ever occur to you that there are things worth going to prison for? And I thought, yep, I love this guy. And I was already disillusioned with the great American religious enterprise. And I thought, finally, a good, clean-hearted disciple that wasn't compromised. And I said, Lou, it has occurred to me that there are some things worth going to prison for. And I said, why don't you go back and pastor the church? He said, I'd rather go back to smoking dope than go back to that church. And I thought, I get that too. Because I was, I hadn't given up on God, but the church, I didn't want to go to church. And so there was just something that happened in my heart. I thought, dude, I've been looking for somebody like you for a long time. And so now this is miraculous, Tony. It's never happened before or since. But I suddenly blurted out. And remember, I'm there on an assignment for 3 days, right? And the Apostolic Network asked me to come. And the church was just going along with it. And so, and I never wanted to pastor. I never even wanted to go back to church at the time. But I blurted out. I said, he had just said, I'd rather go back to smoking dope than go back to the church. And I blurted out, I said, well, if I come pastor the church, will you come help me? And if it doesn't work, I'll go smoke dope with you. And Tony, I was a cowboy from Idaho. I'd never smoked dope. And Lou, he said, we should probably talk about that. He said, have you ever smoked dope before? And I said, no. He said, I have smoked everything a human being can possibly smoke. And I said, okay, so you have more experience. He said, I do. And I will hold you accountable to that kind of a commitment. And I said, I'll hold myself accountable to that. I said, if the Bible doesn't work, I will go smoke dope with you. But I said, I've counted on this my whole life that if we did things right, it would work. If we just followed Jesus Christ the way he asked us to, my whole life is about believing that. If I'm wrong about that, I'm ready for a do-over. So I'm up for anything if the Bible isn't true. And he looked at me, took another sip of his coffee, stuck his hand out, and he said, deal. And so we shook hands, and the whole thing had just caught us both by surprise. And he said, what now? And I said, well, next week I'm moving to Australia. And I guess you go back to doing whatever you were doing before I called you tonight. And he said, so that whole conversation was bullshit? I said, no, it wasn't bullshit. I just asked you a question. If I came to pastor the church, would you help me? And he said, yeah, but you weren't serious about pastoring the church. I said, no, it was a serious question. But no one has asked me to pastor the church. I just came down here for a 3-day intervention to take a report back to Portland. And so I said, and he was like, I said, hey, listen, I believe that God's sovereign. I don't even know why I said that, but I did hear myself say it. And if God is in this thing, he'll work it out somehow. But if he's not, nobody's asked me to pastor this church, and I'm not particularly interested in pastoring any church anywhere ever. So I said, oh, brother. So I said, well, and he said, am I going to hear from you again? I said, I don't know. I'm headed for Australia. My wife's down saying goodbye to her parents, and I don't know. But if by some strange act of God, they asked me to pastor, I've got your phone number. So he just rolled his eyes and he said, whatever. I walked out, and the next morning I headed for Portland with my report, slapped it down on this apostle's desk, and he said, so what'd you find out? I said, Dick, the same thing I always find out. Everything rises or falls on leadership. They don't have strong visionary leadership. They've gone through hard times. Everybody is disgruntled and confused. And it is what it is. So he said, well, why don't you go pastor it? I said, because I don't want to be a pastor, and no one has invited me. He said, well, actually, they did. He said, they called this morning before you got here and asked if I had made it there. And I said, no. And they said, well, when he comes to your office, will you ask him if he would consider moving to Yuba City and pastoring the church? And honestly, Tony, it's just like, what? So I knew God was involved in it. And my wife and I, we moved there in 1987. Never pastored before. You know the backdrop. I've never seen miracles. I was disillusioned with a lot of stuff. But I connected with Lou, and I said, Lou, let's do this. Let's really honestly look at the life of Jesus Christ, what he did and what he didn't do. And we will try to do what he did, and we'll avoid what he didn't do. And we'll see how that goes. So everybody that was on staff, all the elders, deacons, everybody, I said, I want everybody to step down. We're building this from the floor up, and we're not building it based on what we've learned from our Christian experience. We're building based on Jesus Christ as example. So if that doesn't work, I'm going to resign and just be honest about it. It didn't work. We gave it our best shot. It didn't work. So I took Lou and a couple other guys that he recommended, and we went up to Tahoe, which is a couple hours from here, and we prayed. And the last morning there, we stayed there for 2.5 days, but the last evening, I woke up the next morning with a verse in my mind, which doesn't often happen to me. But anyway, it was the verse that said, Jesus Christ went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed of the devil, for God was with him. I thought, that's it. We were trying to do what he did. That's what he did. He went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed of the devil. So I told the guys, I said, I think God gave me this verse. I want it to be the foundation of what we do here. And so that's our marching orders. So Lou said, how do we heal those who are oppressed of the devil? I said, I don't know. He said, okay, well, if that's our marching orders and we don't know how to do it. I said, well, it says he went about doing good and healing all who are oppressed of the devil. I know how to do good. So do you. So do you, Jerry. We all know how to do good. So I know enough about the Bible to know that God says in the Bible, if you're faithful in little things, he'll give you greater things. And if you're faithful in natural things, he'll give you true spiritual treasure. So since none of us know how to heal those who are oppressed of the devil, and all of us know how to do good, that's what we're going to do. And so we wrote a letter to all of the community service agencies, and it just said, we're starting a new church in Yuba City, and we're Christians, and we're followers of the man Christ Jesus, who went about doing good. I didn't even mention the other part of it, because we didn't know how to do that. And so I said he went about doing good. So if there's anything in the city that is a good venture that we can help with, we will commit ourselves to doing our very best to help. And we got a call from Edmund Smith. He was the director of human services. He said, I got your letter, I need to know if you're sincere or if you're doing it to appease your conscience. And I said, I'm sincere. I'm not trying to appease anything. He said, well, I've been the director of Bi-County Human Services for over 20 years. No church has ever offered to help us. And I thought to myself, wow, no wonder the church is dysfunctional in America. So I said, well, we're just a small group, but I will give you my word. If we can help, we will help. Where would we start? And he said, well, start with single moms. He said, can you match ladies in your church with single moms? And just, they never had mothers. And that's why the wheels are off the wagon. They don't know how to be a mom. And just have the women befriend these ladies. All kinds of ministries came out of that. Pretty on a Shoestring was one of them. And the women of the church would just take a single mom and take her to the Goodwill shops and show her how to be beautiful without it costing hardly anything. And we did all kinds of things, free daycare. And we started something called auto docs. And we just told the director of human services, if you find a legitimate need for a single mom that needs a car fixed, we'll fix them for free. And all kinds of things came out of that. It went on and on. So the church went from 70 to over 1,500. And it just seemed like things were going really well for a little church out in the middle of rice fields in Northern California. And my wife, who is very sensitive spiritually, and of course, her grandfather was a healing evangelist who cast out demons. And she said, Dave, we have a big church. A lot of people are coming, but we're really not making disciples. And she was just weeping and interceding. And she said, I don't think God's pleased with the church the way it is. We have to figure out how to make disciples of Christ. And so anyway, that led to me preaching a 12-week series on uncompromised Christianity. And I didn't know it at the time, but God was kind of moving us toward, getting our war paint on, getting ready for spiritual warfare. And there was a lot of casual attenders that weren't really interested in intensive spiritual reality. I didn't know that because I didn't know what was coming. But anyway, the church kind of shrunk down to fighting weight, and we kept praying, but we kept doing the acts of kindness. And one of them was we were going into juvenile hall. We'd go in every Monday night and talk to the kids and whatnot. And we had another team that went in every Thursday night. But anyway, I'll never forget this. I was actually pretty happy and just being Mr. Nice Guy and helping single moms and taking them groceries and whatnot. It's actually very fulfilling. And we did about $1.5 million in giving out of groceries in our mercy ministries last year, and even more the year before. So it's still a major focus at the church.